Hi, welcome to Relish Books. Today I am talking about The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And it's a little bit of an unusual favorite for me, but it is one of my favorite books. I love reading it, I love talking about it. So I'm going to try to keep it short today, but there is so much that you could say about this book. It's so beautifully written. And it is frustrating to try to talk about it when I know that so many critics and um, people like writing introductions have summed it up so well. I wish I could talk as beautifully about beautiful writing as they write about it. But so I read um, The Great Gatsby, and then I read This Side of Paradise. And it's really interesting. Of course, This Side of Paradise came before, and Fitzgerald very clearly um, did something very different with The Great Gatsby, and he was trying really hard to make it was like he was consciously making a masterpiece, and he knew that his previous works had not been. And I really don't like This Side of Paradise. It has this prevailing sense of just depression and despair and kind of almost like this meaninglessness of life. And these, it's largely about college age kids. They go to college, they have all these big ideas, and their lives just kind of crash and burn, which in some ways has some good lessons, but I think that he doesn't really portray it that way. It's more like he really, instead of realizing that all these college kids were being foolish and young, it's more like he just ends it with, like, yeah, um, life is meaningless. And I really didn't like it. It just had a dark, kind of complaining tone almost that I really didn't enjoy. The writing was good, but nowhere on the level of The Great Gatsby. And some people might argue that The Great Gatsby has similar themes, and it does in some ways, but the way that he tells it makes all the difference. Um, Largely in the characters, of course, but also it is a tragedy. It is trying to show kind of the hollowness of the jazz age and the pointlessness in some ways of this whole lifestyle and just this wealth and luxury. But I think it's a lot more real than the previous book. And the the dialogue in the book, which I don't really remember there being great dialogue in This Side of Paradise. Um, the dialogue in this book and just every line is so succinct and so fresh. You could say, and people will say that it's a tragedy, that it's just a tragedy showing the degenerateness of the times or whatever. But I don't, reading it, it doesn't feel like a tragedy to me because it's so much fun to read, I think. Sometimes I just take it off the shelf and read passages from it because they're so beautiful, so fresh. Reading the dialogue is to be constantly amazed because every line is not what you expect, and it's something so bright and fresh. The descriptions of people are amazing. The description of Daisy when we first meet her is so great. Something about her face was full of bright things. She had bright eyes and a bright mouth, and just, I'm sure I didn't make that sound as good as it is, but just everything about it is so uniquely told, while at the same time being very clear and straightforward. It is truly a literary masterpiece, but not at, because sometimes these literary masterpieces are literary masterpieces just in the writing, and then I don't like the story. But I do like the story of this book, even though it is dark. It doesn't really feel dark. and you can see the irony in the story. You can appreciate the emptiness of these lives while still really enjoying the view of these lives. And the title, of course, is partly what it's so famous for. I think it's really funny that Fitzgerald didn't like the title himself. He came up with so many different titles. The Great Gatsby was a title that his editor really wanted. I think his editor was also brilliant and really helped in making the book what it was. Um, he came up with so many different bad titles, and I almost wonder if the book would not be as well known as it is today if he had gone with some of them. One of them was something like Among the Ash Heaps and the Millionaires. One of them that he really wanted to use, but it was by that point it was too late to change it, was Under the Red, White, and Blue. And you're like, those are terrible names compared to The Great Gatsby, which like sums up the whole story so perfectly. The book wasn't a success in its time, and Fitzgerald was upset about that. He partly blamed the name for it. He also, interestingly, said that he thought it wasn't popular because it didn't have like strong female characters, and female characters were like what were popular in the time period. And I think that's so funny because Daisy Buchanan is such an iconic character. She's at the heart of this book. She's kind of why everything happens. So I don't know what he was thinking when he said that, because it does have very unique female characters, and not just the one. There are multiple female characters. Maybe he just meant that it like wasn't told from a girl's point of view, or that she isn't like the protagonist. I mean, but honestly, Gatsby is this mysterious kind of figure. Daisy is actually a lot more present and real in some ways. So yeah, I don't know what he was thinking with that, but yeah, I wish he could have known that, as his editor foresaw, that it would become a very popular classic. So I love Gatsby himself, and this is a contradictory book for me because it's not the kind of book I would normally like, but he's enough of a blend between being like vague and mysterious, and also just being really fun and unique. There's not really any way to describe Gatsby other than to read the book, which is part of his greatness. And he's not a good person. Like, you kind of eventually get some of his backstory and you're like, oh, he's actually a really bad guy, but you still feel for him. You still want him to find happiness. You still feel sorry for him, because while he has all this glamour, all this wealth, and his parties are super fun to read about, but like during his parties, he's sometimes kind of just off in the distance. A lot of people who like came to his parties didn't even know who he was. He's a very lonely, isolated man who's trying really hard to like surround himself with like all this glitter, basically, to kind of make up for everything that he's lacking. And the book is considered a tragedy, but I don't feel that way about it, because it has enough like lightheartedness, enough humor, and sometimes the humor is just in the writing, just these little quirks. I don't know. Some people are surprised that I would like this book so much when it's so different from a lot of the other stuff that I read, but it just very strongly appeals to me. I think it does probably to anybody who really loves great literature, because his use of language is stunning. I don't know if I can think of an example of, for what this book is, of better dialogue, and dialogue that constantly keeps you guessing, but also helps build the characters and show who they are without like putting it in your face all the time without having to constantly describe them. He uses his dialogue to further the story so masterfully. And it's really encouraging in some ways, like, because Fitzgerald did not think he was a naturally good writer. And I always love it when I hear about authors who are like, no, I wasn't I wasn't good at writing. It does not come naturally to me. It's something that I have to really work for. And in his like letters to his editor, you really see that Fitzgerald was very aware of what he was writing, and he was giving everything he had to make a masterpiece. He was measuring every line and just giving it all he had. He was like, I know that the works that I've done before were not the best that I can give, and this time it's going to be the best. And I think he really achieved that. And I think it's just really neat that writers don't have to be like born with the gift. I think sometimes we think that about them, and most of them would probably deny that and be offended maybe that we think that because of all the hard work that they had to do. He worked very, very hard on this book. And yeah, I think he really achieved what he wanted to, even though it had some disappointments for him. I think that the cover, the jacket, is fun because while it's not very nice looking, Ernest Hemingway actually, when he saw it, he said it was the ugliest book jacket he'd ever seen. But the editor actually commissioned the jacket while Fitzgerald was still finishing the story. And when Fitzgerald saw it, he was like, don't sell that jacket to anybody else because I've put it in the story. So he actually used this art to in his story. I don't remember exactly how it plays in, but he actually was influenced by it. And so I think it is important to get the original cover, not a lot of these new ones that I'm seeing. There's so many different editions of the book. Another testament to what a classic it has become. But I think even if you think it's ugly, I think to have the original art on the cover is important. Again, I just think that the book is such a joy to read. I remember my older sister reading it when I was pretty young and talking about it, and she didn't really care much for the story, but she appreciated the writing. And I remember her telling me about certain parts, in particular, the moment when Gatsby is showing Daisy around his mansion and he starts pulling all his beautiful shirts out of the closet and just like throwing them in this heap. All these like super expensive, gorgeous shirts. And it's just such an odd little detail. And just this play between characters, because she starts to cry and she's just like, I'm just sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts. And I remember her telling me about that part and me kind of like resolving, like, yeah, I'm gonna read that book someday. And then coming across a passage from it in a book about writing kind of made me remember and be like, okay, I need to read that. And I loved it so much right from the start. I still love it. It's great to just pick up and reread bits of it anytime. And just, yeah, to study writing, I think is wonderful. Just as a book, it's not the best story in the world. I'm not saying that. The people are not very good people, but as a book, as a literary work, it is just phenomenal. It's hard to say what books are on my top 10. That's kind of an impossible thing, but this one might be on there. It's so good, and I think it just has a lot of personal appeal to me. I don't even really know why, but yeah, I would highly recommend it. So that's all I have today for The Great Gatsby. Thanks.